title. We'll talk about the subtitle. Fernando, do you mind to read the subtitle? Oh, and there's a cat.
Let's find the lead together.
Okay, all right. We'll come back to that. So let's see if I can advance the slides.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, all right. So we're looking at the first 5 questions that I have seen on the Miro board. So I wrote them down, and also I shaped the presentation honoring the people who wrote their questions first. We'll look at all the questions later on. What's the most important advice you'd offer to someone new to Kanban that's struggling to apply stop starting and start finishing? The top problems I would focus on when working with clients. How did that change over time? It's very interesting. It did change. Have you been implementing Kanban after leaving Microsoft? What approach do you recommend to determine the financial impact of starting or growing in the application of Kanban? And how do you change people's behavior? The reason I'm reading these questions is because I would ask you if I answer them when you get, to the end of the presentation. So let's dive in. I understand, and Fernando, you can leave your mic unmuted because I was gonna say, how many? We have close to 40 people, about 38 people. Mm-hmm. Are most of them trainers or coaches or consultants, or?
We have a few trainers.
Okay.
Most of them are going to be practitioners. Many have taken KSD. Okay.
So then I wonder, and happy to also have a conversation if people feel free to unmute, but are people familiar with the principles and practices the way they are written here? I know, there could be 6 principles, but I put here the change management principles, which are the original principles we've kind of started with. So start with what you do now by understanding the current processes, respecting existing roles, gaining agreement, build relationships, and encourage acts of leadership at all levels, which is part of the title of this presentation, right? Leadership at all levels. Now, if you have gone through training, I assume you're familiar with principles and practices. If not, you have a chance to see the principles and practices. There are 6 practices. I'm not going to go through them, but I do want to highlight the acts of leadership at all levels, and that the scientific method stands at the basis for continual improvement, right? So let's explore this a little bit. And along the way, we will find the answers, I think, to the questions we started with, and perhaps we'll find questions to some new questions you have added on Miro. We'll explore them together. So anybody wants to venture what the essence of Kanban is? You have seen the picture before, some of you who have been through training, so feel free to speak up, even if you're a coach. If you've never been through training, feel free to take a guess, but what might the essence of Kanban be? And in front of us, we have a picture with 4 people, and everybody is doing something. Everybody's saying something.
Daniel has something to say.
Should I just talk? I don't know much about Kanban, but here it seems like making, I guess, everything visual, so everybody can see it.
Go on, yeah. All right, what else?
I'd say continuous improvement based off of what I saw on the previous slide.
Okay. So here is a question that you may hear a trainer when they go through the training with this slide. Not everybody does it, or people may not do it all the time. Again, it's contextual. But if someone would ask the question, how many acts of leadership people see in this picture, what would you say? And feel free to speak up, and we can get as many answers as possible. Feel free to unmute and say a number, right? The question is, how many acts of leadership do you see in this, when you look at this picture?
I'm sorry, what did you say? How many? What's the question?
How many acts of leadership
can
you observe when you look at this picture?
one?
Well, as a leader, you would want to discover how you can break up whatever process they're doing into stages so that you can see where they're stuck or why they're too busy or how come there's certain state parts where they are idle.
So I heard someone say one act of leadership. And I think you might agree with that person because you say if you're the leader, you try to explore why people are stuck, busy, or idle. Is that fair?
There are some people in the chat saying 4.
Okay. Thank you for
Jack
monitoring the chat.
Vivek is 4. Edwin 4.
I go with 6.
Okay. And now you have to explain that because the usual answers are 1 or 4.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got the 4 obvious ones, which is it obviously takes courage to admit that you're stuck or you're too busy, but also the very fact that this board exists means you're in an organization where somebody's agreed that transparency matters.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can say these things in a meeting, obviously there's an active leadership that people feel they're free to do so.
So the 6 acts of leadership are the people.
The 4 main ones, plus the board for transparency, and plus the fact that we're in an environment where this kind of the conversation is taking place.
All right, so haven't met Jeffrey before, but I would say Jeffrey had some coaching training.
I've met a few people in the community, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so in coaching, we say listen to all the voices, and I've never heard 6 before. I never heard anyone say 6 before in last 18, 20 years or so. But that's a very good answer, especially if you consider that the system has its own voice, the system being the 4 people and the board. So you have 4 the people, 5th the board, and 6 the voice of the system. So Jeffrey, you broke new grounds. Thank you for volunteering that, for speaking up. So now let's see if I get back to use the mouse and if it works. If not, maybe
Yep, you're in control.
click forward. I know, it just stopped working. So give it a shot. Can you advance it?
Oh, yep. You should be able to control it now. It says Dragos is controlling your screen. There you go.
Okay. So when we look at leadership through the lens of Kanban, we look at leadership as an act, as an action, not as a position. And Jeffrey, I would say, made a great gift to all of us here by pointing out there are 6 voices. I think even Alexei and the veterans in the room are surprised because you probably always heard 1 or 4. So now there you go. You have another option to go with 5 and 6, the voice of the system. So that's very specific to systems coaching. And remember, there's a principle that says acts of leadership at all levels, where I left leadership to kind of stand out on this slide. So leadership is important in Kanban, but leadership is not, again, it's not about the position. It's about hearing all the voices. It's about democratizing the process and giving everybody a voice, including giving the system a voice. The more you can create transparency, what happens if you look at the board in the back, the more options you will find to solve the situations that evolve over time. The other thing we have seen in the principles, besides start from where you are, was to use the scientific method. So this slide is nothing but a reminder that by applying the scientific method, a group of people that are visualizing their work and that they listen to the voice of that system, they can create change. One of the questions we've seen earlier was, how do you get other people to change? My version of this answer, like the way I would answer this, is that you shouldn't even attempt to try to change other people. You can make people curious, you can show people, you can make things visible. However, if they are unwilling to see or they're strongly biased, at least in our work environments, you know, I would avoid. It's not about changing. It's not about trying. How do you change someone? You cannot. You have to make that person curious that there are other options, there are other possibilities. And then as they explore them, they build their confidence and they start to see a different aspect of the reality they live in. So this is probably one of my favorite slides in this deck. I created it several years ago. I don't remember the context. I think it was related to client work. And I would also say, if I think hard about it, it was also a client that initially was mostly interested in certifications or in methods, and they've been through a lot of methods. They've been through a lot of training. And I created this slide, and it helped them actually become curious about behaving somewhat differently than they were behaving until then. So this slide says methods do not provide answers. They help us ask better questions, right? So the answers emerge as a result of enabling this kind of just-in-time leadership or leadership across all levels. But the takeaway is, do not look at methods. Whether you learn Kanban, you want to learn Kanban, you want to get training or get certified, the method itself does not provide answers. The same thing I would say is true if you are a coach or a trainer. Just because you know Kanban and you can teach it, you can be the best trainer with the best reviews. The point is not the training. The point is the situations, the challenges that you help other people solve. You know, what are the better questions that you can ask now that you have been through the Kanban training? So I would say something that has been consistent and that I always try to do more of or get better at in the past 18 years or so, really, I would say it's around encouraging acts of leadership at all levels. Another way I refer to it is, how can I create conditions for all those voices to be heard? So again, Jeffrey, thank you so much for jumping in with the number 6. I've never heard it before, and myself, I usually go with 1 or 4 because that's what most people would recognize. So I learned something as well, right? How do you encourage and how do you make all the voices heard? As you hear all these, well, okay, and I don't want to say that it's good to hear voices, okay? I hope you understand in context, we're talking about Kanban and visibility, but you have to hear all the voices in your system. So let's see. Probably when I was on mute and I couldn't speak, I was correcting Fernando. You know, he said that I invented Kanban or created Kanban. I did not. David did. David wrote the book. David gave it the name. What I did was, I had some particular situation and problems that I had to change about 20 years ago or so. And I would say that I created the genesis for what Kanban became, right? So this is all pre-Kanban. And in 2005, there was a team in India, and that picture shows, you can probably recognize me there. First trip in India, in Hyderabad, and many more trips after that. I think I went to work with that team in India maybe at least 3 or 4 times. I've been to India at least 14 times in different cities, working with different companies. The image that pops up now are the results of this team. So to make a long story short, this could be a bit busy, but you know, you have seen it. If you have been through training, if you're a coach or a trainer, you recognize it. What I did, I'm showing in red where it says WIP. You can see how these people, the exact team, they had 60 to 90 things work in progress. So they, all the way in the left where it says FY04, fiscal year 04, quarter 4, that's kind of where they work, those 2 quarters, and FY05 Q1, right? So that's kind of where I started. I was promoted at the end of the fiscal year in 04. I applied for a job to work with this team. So I started in Q1 of FY05, fiscal year 05, right, 2005. And what you see to the right on top of this picture is that somehow, work in progress, we figured out that we had too much, 60 to 90 things for 6 developers. There's 7 people, there should be 7 people there, but there are 3 developers, 3 testers, and a program manager. The program manager was not writing code, but he was instrumental in solving, you know, clarifying requirements and all that. The takeaway from here is that this team, all the way through into fiscal year 06, they went from an average of 155 days to solve a change request, which are the top two colors, blue and orange. Not sure how to explain it if someone is colorblind, but you see the letters, there's other time to resolve, and below it's severity 1 TTR. So severity 1s were taking about 120 days to resolve, and that went down to about 21 days at the end of the chart. And the blue line, or that says other TTR, everything else that was not a severity 1, went from about 155 days, close to 160, to about 5 days. So in the end, all these, the same people doing the same type of work, they're spending between 5 and 21 days, depending on the priority of the work, compared to 120 to 160 days. The other thing is productivity. Productivity went up. You see the very bottom line, it says productivity, that's the yellow line. It went from 9 things per quarter, 9 change requests per quarter, to somewhere around 50, okay? And somewhere along the way, right there in FY06 Q2, we eliminated the backlog. Now, when I say we eliminated the backlog was growing at a steady pace. We were getting about one change request per business day. So we're getting somewhere between 20 and 25 change requests per month, right? And when you deliver only 9 and you already have a backlog of 200, which is kind of where I started with working with this team, your backlog is only gonna grow, right? You get 25 in, you deliver 9 in a quarter, your backlog is growing. Well, we eliminated that backlog. This is very similar if you've ever read the book The Goal by Eli Goldratt. In there, you would learn about the experience of a manufacturing manager who went through some very similar story, that they got to a point where they were working in real time on all the orders. And in this case, all we had to do was to improve throughput about 5 times, to about, deliver everything you do about 5 times faster, deliver about 5 times more. We also realized that certain things should be closed and we shouldn't work on them because they're duplicates. But that was only about 10–15% of the backlog. Anyway, that's the XIT story. And if you are taking a class or if you're teaching a class, you're very familiar with it. If not, you will learn more about the details when you go through. Now, I think that's what I've been thinking. I was looking at the questions you asked. I've been thinking about a lot of these presentations I have been in, and what people find most useful are actually the stories, and not necessarily going into the Kanban principles and practices. Right? I have absolutely nothing to sell. And it's not about, I'm not trying to sell classes or to sell you a methodology. And I'm here because I also trust the people who are organizing this. And I know that what they care about is to help organizations, teams, and people and individuals to solve similar situations. So this story and this presentation is really about what you see highlighted. It's about simplicity, right? How can you simplify what you do? And I will show you kind of how this started and what happened before I met David, and what happened after I met David, and after we started to think through, and he encouraged me to apply theory of constraints. Before I met David, like everybody else back in whatever, 2004, 2005, I heard about Scrum, and then I heard that Ken Schwaber is coming to Bellevue. I was working for Microsoft right in Washington State. So I went and took the Scrum Master class from Ken Schwaber. The nature of the work we've had here, time boxes would not have worked. We had to deliver things in real time. We were supporting over 100 systems in production, right? So I like the idea of a backlog. I like the idea of a Scrum Master, and I already applied all these things, and I actually applied iterative development the year before, after I took the training, which actually led to my promotion. And now I had a different problem to solve, right? And that method, I did not see how it would solve these problems. So all that happened before the genesis to Kanban. So what happened is David happened to work at Microsoft, and I don't want to spend too much time with the story and the details, I saw an email on a distribution list about Agile that he was going to talk about theory of constraints. I was reading that book, and when I saw the email going through the distribution list about Agile, I did not realize that was the same David Anderson. So I picked up the phone, I looked him up in the Microsoft directory. I said, hey, my name is so-and-so. I'm a program manager in IT, in Microsoft IT. And it's so funny because I find it so funny to see your email about how you're going to talk about the theory of constraints. And I don't know if you know, but there's this guy, David Anderson, who wrote a book on Agile management, and he also talks about theory of constraints. And all I heard was, I am David Anderson. I am that David Anderson. So that's how I met David, and it's been 18 years of good stuff. So something happened in between when I started in this role and before David joined, and that's what I'm going to show you next. So we quickly reduced, and again, you see something similar. These are the original charts that I've had in Excel in 2005, and I showed in June 2005, exactly 8 years ago this month, in an all hands to about 400 people. That's where we started. What you see in the box, in the box is where we started, and then you start to see the improvement. So we went from that 120 to 160 days. We cut that to somewhere between 40 and 80 days, about 40 days for severity 1. So that was an improvement about 3 times, right? We go from 120 days to 40 days for resolving severity 1 issues. And then everything else we went down from about 160 days to about 80. And at that point, I was forecasting that nothing else would happen and that we drove all the improvement that we could have driven out of this story. I was talking with David about this in our trips. We all work together and we travel together. And we were laughing at this. He said, any sane person would have stopped. The improvement was dramatic and you would have just say, okay, what's the next challenge? So we haven't stopped. And then you have seen the results, and pretty much this is where Kanban came, because I was still curious. When I have seen this improvement, I met David right around the time where when I was about to give this presentation. So I said, hey, here are the improvements we realized. I wonder what else is possible. So it was a matter of curiosity. So there are 2 words I would like you perhaps to remember or make a mental note. One is simplicity, from one of the earlier slides. That by the way, that screenshot with the word simplicity is from the initial case study that David and I wrote, and then he presented the theory of constraints in Barcelona. I asked for budget to go to Barcelona with David, so we co-present, and my manager at the time said, we don't have budget, and what is this theory of constraints things anyway? That's about manufacturing, doesn't apply to software engineering. We're good friends, and I worked with him again and again and again after that. We are part of the same leadership team, and every time he would see me, he would start smiling and shaking his head. Man, it's like, I still remember what I didn't let you go to Barcelona, and so the theory of constraints doesn't apply to software engineering. And pretty much at that point in time, we were applying theory of constraints to everything we were doing in software engineering. Let's try to advance the slide because he's not listening to me. Okay, so again, this is still from the presentation in 2005. Remember, I got a promotion. I'm starting to work with this team. And I was saying, okay, I started around the new year. So, someone asked me, what do you want Santa? What is Santa going to bring you? And I said, well, I just got this promotion. Here is what I'm wishing in my new job. And you see the things on top. And then the results are the results that I was showing earlier on the previous slide, where we pretty much cut everything in half, right? So I felt, hey, wow, I got my Christmas in June. What could be next, right? And then I met David, and everything else happened after that. This is one of the pictures that I used. There was a previous person managing this team before I was. And the methods or the approach he was taking was he was doubling down on enforcing the current process in place, which was not working. So when you try to enforce a process that doesn't work, productivity was even worse. And then I noticed something similar to this caricature, and I said, hey, what happened here? And the response was the team manager was not around. So there was a spike in productivity when the manager was not around. Anyway, I felt to share that since it was in the original deck in 2005. So what you see here again, this is based on this caricature. One lesson that I took away is the first question here: is my role part of the problem? Really saying, am I part of the problem? So I start to work with this team was based in Hyderabad, India, and when I looked at the results, I didn't know what to think. So then move on to step 2. I go to India, I meet the people, and right about the time when we are coming out of that restaurant at lunch, the picture I showed you, the team in India, I'm thinking, wow, these are very nice people. They're very experienced. You notice, we're all about the same age. We all had pretty good experience, either in engineering, quality, testing, program management, or so on. They didn't have quality issues, but everything they were doing was extremely slow. So I started to think, how much is the process and the person managing the process a part of the problem? And that was me now. Okay. By the way, when I went there, I was told that this team cannot produce anything to save their lives, and that I should look for ways to build another team somewhere else or there, but with different people. People were never the issue. And I would say this was a process, a management, and a leadership issue, because they were pushing down their own process, and they were doubling down on it. So I'm not going to go through everything else, but ask yourself this question: whether you're a consultant or a trainer, or you work in a company and you have a challenge, try to understand how is your role part of that problem, and think about what Gregory said earlier. You look at a picture and someone says there's only one voice, but then someone comes and says, no, there are 6 voices, and you see only 4 people. So what are the voices that you are not listening to? What are the things that you need to visualize in order to point out what is going on, right? The things that you see on the left side, the ones that come through animations, at the beginning, remember, like I said, this was somewhere halfway through, I think, the fiscal year after I got the promotion. And what do companies do when a new fiscal year starts? They come up with 5 goals, right? So for this fiscal year, leadership said, we want to encourage personal excellence, holistic customer focus, quality, urgency, and making others successful. The culture at Microsoft indeed was focused on this. Well, I'll tell you, I still, these have been engraved. I really liked it. They've been engraved in my head. I really liked it when I seen them the first time. I also liked the leadership team we've had in this organization. And I started to write. Nobody asked us to write, what does this mean to you? But I wrote on this slide, and I presented to the whole organization of 400 people to say, here is what I take away from these 5 values. Here is what I think they mean to me. Is my role part of the problem? Do I treat customers the way they want to be treated? It's a very interesting change in here, because many of you may have heard, treat others the way you want to be treated. We need to treat others the way they want to be treated, okay? I was gonna brag. I couldn't believe I've done 3,025 push-ups in 16 days in the month of May, raising money for St. Jude Hospital for children. I went through extreme pain. I went through a lot of hurt. I couldn't stand up from the bed, but I didn't stop, and I went between 100 and 400 push-ups a day. You don't want me to treat you the way I treat myself. Okay, let's put it that way. So let's make sure we treat customers the way they want to be treated, right? be proud. If you're not proud of what you're doing and the people around you are not proud of what you're doing, it goes beyond quality. It goes into depression. It goes into hating your job. So, the question again, is your role part of the problem? Or, how can I take pride in what I do? And then comes back to urgency. And always, how can I make others successful? And I think you'll see that reflected in a couple of other things we'll talk about. So I'm moving on to a case study really quick. I want to make sure we have time to talk. You will see here some questions. They're pointing to a whiteboard. Again, if you have been through training, you might recognize this. Anybody, even organizers, recognize this? You know what this is?
Mm-hmm.
It's also in the book, right? So what happened is, after David and I have seen the results we've had, someone tried to hire both of us, one to run engineering and one to run operations, at a company also owned by Bill Gates that was also in Seattle, close to Microsoft. The name of the company was Corbis. So David went, I ended up going somewhere else. And I ended up pursuing and applying Kanban in operations for about 6 years. We have won 3 times while I was there, another time later on, but we've won the best IT organization to work for in CIO magazine. So we apply the same principles and practices to operations. But here what happened, continuing the Kanban storyline, David went to Corbis. And what you see here resulted in him writing the book. So he went here. The other one, I was managing the team. David was more like a voice in my head and, a friend. So he was kind of like, hey, let's go through this. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? We would meet whenever we could, probably at least once a month. And let's see who else worked at Corbis besides David. So we have David. And I don't know if he was still at Corbis when he published the book, but this is the second significant case that gave him the patterns for what has become the Kanban method. And then he wrote, this book has been translated into multiple languages. And then these other books came up, right? A bunch of different books. Someone else there, if you're familiar with Kanban, you're probably familiar with Dan Vacanti. Dan Vacanti, you can see him in this picture because he's running the stand-up meetings. So he's somewhere to the left in front of a whiteboard. And then Dominica de Grandis was also there, right? So it's interesting because someone asked the question, have you used Kanban again after XIT? Well, do you think I wasn't? Or do you think these people never work this way again? I mean, look at all the stuff. There are 3 people there and they all wrote books. Oh yeah, and I've never seen a point of writing books, sorry. I can write. I say there are 2 kinds of people. It's not true, but it's funny. I say there are 2 kinds of people, the kind of people that write books and the kind of people that the books are written about. But in this case, the people who wrote the books in front of you, these books are about the work they've done, which is nothing short of amazing. So get familiar with all these books if you are on a learning path about Kanban. So anatomy of a Kanban engagement. Again, whether you're a consultant or a trainer, or you took the class or you'd be taking the class, you'd be going through a series of exercises, right? You're going to start first by reviewing principles and practices of Kanban. Then you're going to go through the series of exercises that I exemplify here with different pictures from perhaps different engagement. Actually, they are all from different engagements. But we ask questions about let me go back. This one, you recognize, one of the, Fernando or Alexei, you want to talk about like, what do you do in this first exercise in static? How do you want to define it? I call it as a, well, I don't call this anymore this way, but this is how I used to present it. There's an inside-out view, what team members say that inhibits delivery of services or what prevents them from being successful, and the outside-in view. Well, how are customers feeling about what we give to them, or the people who consume our services? How do you guys present it?
So for people who have taken the most recent version of the training, we call these sources of dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, there is an alternative name for it. It's called context for change. So which sounds a bit more positive than source of the satisfaction. The main point of it is we do have to explore it from both the customer side of things and also from the point of view of people who do something to deliver it to the customer, because everything that follows, we want to make it stick, but how do we make it stick? It has to at least try to solve someone's problem. So what's the problem?
Right. You're not trying to change people. We never try to change people, but we try to understand what is causing the situation. You know, we take the focus from people, we put the focus on work and say, what's going on? And we try to get these perspectives, right? What is it that you do? What's preventing you from being successful? And whatever you do, who do you give it to? And how do they feel about it? So that's actually an example of just that. Those are three teams. There's actually a leadership team and two different groups of people for one of the clients I was working with. And then all the arrows and everything you see there is about correlating. So the first vertical, if you look on the vertical, there are three vertical things, right? Those are teams. Those are different people. And then you'll see, you can probably almost read, it says internal and external, internal and external. Well, this team in the middle is the consumer of what these people, the first team, does. So when they say internal, this team, here is what we think prevents us from being successful. And below is, here is what our customers say about what we give them. And then here is the customer who says, here is what prevents us from being successful. And here is what our customers tell us. And then here are the last customer, is the green highlight. Yeah, here is what prevents us from being successful. And here is the final, the end customer, this person, right? Here is what the feedback that this person gives. So you try to understand whether you talk about value stream mapping. I mean, you can get into a lot of theories, but please know the language. First, elicit narratives. It's the same as saying, listen to all the voices, right? Listen to all the perspectives. And then this is just another example of how you can start to correlate what you hear and start to see some underlying stories that are actually the stories of why this team delivers what they deliver and why they're stuck where they are. Then moving along these exercises, I'm not describing all the exercises. Alexei or anybody else can jump in. I used to do one exercise where I'm trying to understand demand. So we call it demand analysis, right? So then we go through different exercises and you see a bit of a summary in the next picture that says demand, delivery. So we do demand analysis, right? So how many things do we get? How often? What's the delivery? So for all these things that come in, how many of them do we deliver, right? But you don't have only one service. You might have 3 to 5. Right? So for each one of them, you want to understand demand and delivery patterns. You want to understand predictability of both demand and delivery. And then you put it all together, right? And you try to understand, perhaps in this slide here, I don't want to go into detail, but this is pretty much where I would have a conversation to say, okay, we have 3 different services. Which is the one for which we must reserve capacity always, that is a critical service. And let's say that's 60%. Great. So we allocate 60% to this. And then what else do we do? Well, we do 2 other things. Well, I have 40% left. How do you want to allocate your capacity to that, right? How do you know how much capacity to allocate will come out of understanding the data above, right? What is the demand? What is the delivery? What's the priority? And so on and so forth. So again, I'm trivializing and I'm making it sound a lot easier than it is. But unless you have these conversations and understand the whole system, again, listen to all the voices in the system, you're not gonna make much progress. So this perhaps sounds completely different than what you thought about Kanban, but to me, this is what Kanban means. Then you start to map the workflow. So all this demand and delivery goes through different phases of work. Over here, it's oversimplified. And the picture you see with these little silhouettes and everything. This is actually the original XIT image that I don't remember if it's also in the case that was presented in at the Theory of Constraints conference in Barcelona, but this goes back to 2005. This is how we were working before any changes or at some point interim. But this is how I started to represent our work. And this was all done in Visio, I believe. That's what I had available. And now, okay. So what do we do then? Then we try to define how do we want to track the work, what's important, what is it that we need to track, whether you use Jira, whatever you use, and then you define the Kanban board, right? So this one where you see analyze, design, dev, test, deploy, this is really about identifying the workflow. It doesn't have to be pictures. It could be a picture like this. It could be a workflow like that, but you're not designing the Kanban board yet. You try to understand what are these different things that you do, how often you have some data and say, okay, so how do we get these things done, right? So you build the workflow, then you build the work item, like what's important to track for everything that's going to go through our Kanban system, and then you design a Kanban system. And I just took a collection of different artifacts. This is a picture of a Kanban board I use, a Kanban game, right? And then in the end, you make all the voices visible and you start to manage work through your board. You have this conversation and magic happens. Alexei, what else would you say about static? I pick on you because I see you on camera.
Yeah, Dragos, I think it's important not to say much in this presentation, so we can focus on a lot of other things. I love how you started with that context for change and exploring it from both sides, outside in, inside out, so that everything that follows makes sense. And the next two steps are my favorites: demand analysis and workflow mapping. You know, in business, you have multiple sources of demand. So whatever management system you have has to acknowledge that somehow. So I don't necessarily want to add much to it.
So would you say,
let's just keep it compact?
So this is what people would explore in Kanban system design class, but I will tell you that there's more. And that more, once you get good with this at team level, once you start to work with a couple of teams, you start to look outside of that. You're building your confidence, actually. Not only are you building your own confidence that you can solve this type of problems, but you build the confidence of the leadership team around you. So then you can scale. And I will have this coming up on a slide shortly. But I want to show a quick example. I'll move through this really fast. I didn't even keep track of time. But this is another team I worked with in about 2016. Everything that I will describe here was accomplished I was a consultant. Obviously, I've been consulting for a while, not, with Kanban and whatnot. And when I say for a while, I literally worked on every continent. I know someone from Philippines, so I've been to Manila. I've been there for 3 weeks working with an organization. I literally have been on every continent and worked with about half of Fortune 100 companies. Also work with government, and nonprofit organizations. So I went nuts. I literally, for 10 years, I traveled nonstop. And I was lucky and blessed with a lot of opportunities. Take a look at this board and you notice a lot of work in progress. You notice a lot of things upstream. Upstream stops after the third 3 columns. And then this is the midstream. This is where the teams operate. And this is what they get done on a weekly basis. You can't even count those things. There are so many. So in 4 months, when I say I worked 4 months with them, I would only go there initially every other week for the first 2 months. And then I would only go 1 week on and then 2 weeks off after that. And this was accomplished, and the enthusiasm in this room has been fantastic. So again, very similar pattern if you think about the original XIT story. How much work did these people have in progress when I started? About 2,000. I was perplexed. There are 36 people having 2,000 things open in Jira. Some of them 3 to 4 years old. So we managed to get to about 400, then to 200. And at some point we got to no more than 24 things in progress for that group of 30 some people. And here are the results. So There's some other detail, but this is perplexing. So when you hear stop starting, start finishing, this is, I would say, there is no better essence than something like this to see how much work do we have in progress, how many things do we keep starting, and how come we don't ever finish anything? Well, they went from 12, 13, 16 here, they went to 47, 59, and then something happened here. You know what happened here? That you see less results, and I don't have the whole story. I want to go, I mean, I do have it. I don't want to go through a whole case study. What you see here, 43 things and 41 things. This is only half of the team that you see to the left. They have become so productive that we took half of the organization, and back in the picture here, we started another swim lane, which is the swim lane at the bottom of this picture. They never had capacity to do this work. And this was critical work to be done for a customer that gave them a lot of money in advance that they haven't started, and they were already working with lawyers trying to avoid a lawsuit. So they were happy to give the customer the money back. They just said, there's no way we're going to finish all this work. So by starting to work in this way, they build their confidence. So we took half of the team. This is the half of the team was still doing several times. They're delivering several times more work than they were delivering before. And then they are able to complete the other work in 6 months. And these are some of the people that you have seen, and you can see the physical board. Right? It was a really great story. I'm going to fast forward through this. There's a little bit of a joke built in. But in here, you have C-level people, you have testers, you have developers, you have professional services, you have engineers, you have everything. And these meetings were never taking more than 15 to 20 minutes. And then if people needed to stay in the room, they stayed in the room. So I will close with something I'm doing today. So people say, are you still doing Kanban? I'm like, yeah, and a lot more than that. So I have been at Adobe for, now you'll see that the slides are branded and copyright protected. I joined Adobe somewhere in 2021. It says Dragos joins Adobe. However, in 2018, I delivered about 12 workshops, 2-day workshops. It was a custom workshop that we designed. Eric and I, Eric is a colleague I work with. We are both working for Accenture. That for some of you may know him, it's Eric Green. So we are consultants at Accenture. Accenture was not selling Kanban, but Accenture was happy to get the money for selling 14 training sessions. Otherwise, they were discouraging people to train Scrum, Kanban, or anything like that. But this was a deal that, because of Eric's and I history and results and past performance with other clients, they wanted us specifically to do this training for them. They started to apply it on their own. At some point, Eric joined Adobe in 2019. The pandemic started. So these little mines or, black things here, they represent like an explosion, right? There's some major context change that happened. It started, with a rework, and then we've had the pandemic. At some point, I joined Adobe, and then we keep having a lot of different challenges. So what Eric and I have been doing has evolved a lot over time, right? And wherever you work and whatever clients you have, those situations are continuously changing. So the most important thing is how can you respond quickly? So here is the blown up picture of the little thing that I talked about scale, where we talked about static and how do you build your Kanban system. Well, once you get really good at building these systems, you start to look across an organization. So this is the model that we currently use in our organization. You also see some details around that shortly, but pretty much we have teams, about 40 teams. Now, anywhere between 2 and 10 teams are part of a program, and could be one program by itself, or there could be 2 to 5 programs that are part of a portfolio of services. And then we have a bunch of different feedback loops or meetings, quarterly, monthly, bi-weekly, in order to manage all this. All this is managed with Kanban systems. They're all built in Jira. We customized, we have our own templates for Jira. The portfolio board is one for the whole organization. The program boards, programs are defining their program boards. The program boards are similar to each other, but they're not identical. We encourage each team to build their program the way they need to. And then teams, each team goes through a workshop initially. and some of them have been through the workshop 2 or 3 times. So at this point, I don't do the old workshops the way I used to do them anymore. It's mostly coaching and trying to solve the next level of challenges they have, right? But yeah, so there are, like I said, 40 teams. We probably have in total between team, program, portfolio, close to 70 or 80 Jira Kanban boards. And we review all these 40 teams. We have something called fitness review that we have it every week. So every set of teams, we have 5 sets of teams. So everybody presents their fitness review and their fitness metrics. And it's not about presenting, it's really they're sharing their experiences. And leadership team is in the audience listening. They're not judging, they're just, hey, you know, help me understand what's going on and what help you need and what I can do, right? But that's how we call it emergent auto scaling. Some notes here. I'm not gonna go through all this, but it works. It works better than I showed you some really, I think, impressive results I've had with many different teams. But after being here for 2 years, 2 people, Eric and I, and then we have grown the team actually. We have built a fantastic delivery model, I would say. Then challenges still happening. So right now we have quite a few things and quite a few changes we are driving in order to adapt to whatever happens around us. We used to call this a lean coaching practice and to say, yeah, you know, we now have 6 people, but is it really 6 coaches? No, we found out that there's a need for some kind of lean program management, we call it. So it's lean, it's program management, it's not traditional program management, but we have 3 people out of 6 who are focused on managing large programs. Could be delivering a product or could be delivering a specific customer engagement that has a beginning and an end. Like you have some really big customer that you need to do something for them, right? So we span a program. But yeah, we do, everything we do is rooted in those initial principles and practices, but what we might be doing day to day, you may not recognize, right? It's all lean and Kanban. The business and the revenue has grown 4 times in the 4 to 5 years. And those numbers are approximate, but they have grown about 4 times. When I say approximate, yeah, it starts with 4 and it used to start with 1. How do you improve? Again, back to how do you change others? Well, you can. But part of what happens in this, and we also have operation review meetings, but part of what happens in the fitness review and the operation reviews, even the people who may not believe, they start to see the results of their peers and they automatically become curious. Well, in these presentations, in these fitness reviews, we don't have people, we don't judge people against each other. We encourage, they just focus on presenting the results. We don't go back to say this team is doing better than this team. There is no comparison. And we have the leadership team that believes in these values and in not comparing teams. We built a Power BI solution. What you see in here, the cumulative flow diagram for the whole organization as of, I don't know, 6 months ago. Everything in red, so you can see about there are over 5,000 Jira items in the backlog, but also consider the green is we delivered almost 4,400, right? So this is all cumulative. This is everything before we use the filters at the top in order to separate. We can look team by team. We can look by program. A lot of this has evolved. We have a lot of different, we build, it's our own tool. Eric is driving this. He's brilliant. He actually pursued and studied artificial intelligence, machine learning. So we're constantly bettering ourselves. We're bettering our tools. We're bettering our processes. This is really, it's fascinating. And this is really like, Eric is driving this. I'm not driving all this, but he's all into the data automation. I think what we do is cutting edge. And it has evolved from Excel and things we were doing 18 years ago. So I'm getting close to the end. Here are some journey insights. These are the journey insights we presented at the Kanban conference last year. Where was that, in San Diego?
San Diego, yes.
Yeah. So we present, some of you may have seen some of these slides. it's very important, like the third bullet, we cultivate relationships and we manage work. You'll see this summarized slightly different on the next slide, but we focus. It's weird to say, because I heard some people, they took this out of context and they say, oh, those Kanban people, they don't care about people. They actually say, you know, well, we pay attention to the work and the flow of work, not to people. It cannot be further from the truth. We pay attention to work to remove any idea about blaming people. We just say some work prevents other work from being done. So we have to be careful about the choices we make, and the opportunities we find for improvement. So part of acts of leadership at all levels, again, before you share this, please don't share the presentation. If you can make it a PDF at the end and you can make it available to people. Again, highlighting that we focus on the work being done, not on the people doing the work. Continuous improvement is not important for the sake of improving, is because of adaptation and understanding that change is constant, and whatever was successful a while ago, all of a sudden stops working or can't stop working, or we have to adapt and do something slightly different. So we come back to these questions that I hope we answered. I will come back to this. One last thing. Oh, somehow I sent you the wrong slide because I deleted. I had one extra slide that should have been deleted. Okay, so I have a closing metaphor here, and I promise we're stopping the presentation. And I'm explaining what the metaphor is a bit sarcastically, not that I don't think that people in technology know what a metaphor is. I just thought it was funny. And I use an example. Our team is drowning in technical debt. So in the beginning, I don't remember who it was. It was Fernando, or I think it was Fernando who read that word. Can you read it again?
Leadership.
And lead and leadership, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the first part of the word leadership. How do you read this now?
Oh, the one on the right?
Yes.
That's lead.
Lead, right?
The chemical element is lead, yes.
And it's something heavy usually. When you think of lead, that's lead weights, right? Yeah, it's heavy. So so remember that lead may be part of leadership. So you want to take the lead out of leadership, because otherwise you have leadership. I'm not sure. You can explain that. You can explain that to folks and say moving from leadership to leadership. Remember, it's not about people at the top. It's about the common acts of leadership we're all actually accountable and responsible to do. So these are things that motivate me. I was doing a train the trainer class in Seattle a few years ago, and someone made that caricature of me, and we decided to call it the weightlifter. I'm sorry, it's meant to mirror me, but anybody can be a weightlifter. It doesn't have to be someone wearing pants or a man. Weightlifting. Here you go, something else to try. So I said I was gonna go back to this slide. Can we go back to the questions?
Yeah. One more?
Yeah, go to the circle with the initial 5 questions. Should be a couple of slides back. Right here. Yeah. So I'm not gonna ask the people who asked the question how they would answer it now, but I truly believe that we covered this, right? What's most important advice? What do you think from the audience? Anybody? Do you have any takeaways? Let's start the conversation, and then Fernando, queue up the Miro board so we can go look at the other stuff.
Yeah, would you like me to switch to the Miro board? I think we have the same questions there, and there were some other questions.
Yeah. I wanted to just get 1 or 2 of these to discuss. Yeah. I don't know who I don't remember who asked them. Well, but
So yeah,
Does this
we
make
don't know.
sense?
We don't know if the person who posted the question is online, but you know, what do people think? What would be the answer to that based on what you've heard?
Do you feel this was helpful to give you some ideas about how you might go about answering these questions?
Any idea from anyone?
We only lost one person. We went from 38 to 37. So
Okay. Yeah, I guess I have no other chance, though I'm not at my best. This is Katya. Yeah, my question was the last one. How do you change people's behavior? And it was a little bit provocative by nature. So my takeaway from your brilliant session, as usual, is just you don't change people's behavior. You try to change the system and the process. I'm not sure if I'm kind of like getting this, but
I would say we want to make people curious, and the only way to make them curious is to show them that something else is possible. And from that curiosity, if we support them, they will become curious and they will take a first step and a second step, and then they will build their confidence. And then truly none of us really change, but at least we start to see some other points of view and we start to adapt and we build, it's like a tool set. We start to be able to do different things, right? It's the same concept that goes hand in hand with this: treat others the way they want to be treated. Don't treat others the way you want to be treated. It's kind of gonna blow in your face, I think. And then, yeah, if you really try to change people, yeah, I could make jokes about my first marriage, but it's not leading anywhere comfortable emotionally. How would you like for someone to think? Just think about for a second, someone is trying to change you. Right? It's not a good, yeah. Why?
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. That's why I said it was provocative.
Yeah. All right.
I have a question. Follow up.
Shoot.
Go ahead.
Ken, you went on mute.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. So what if, let's say, for example, you're dealing with a business person who is too idealistic? Don't you want to kind of like make him change and become a little more pragmatic and become more realistic so that the business goals can still be met without being perfect?
Perhaps there are two parts to your question. One is that someone expects that if they change something, that whatever they change to is going to be perfect. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, kind of like
So
everything's, yeah.
When we think like that, it's very unlikely that any of us will attempt to make any change. I think we wouldn't even attempt to drive to work. And I've been, you said you're originally from Philippines?
Yeah.
I know traffic in Philippines.
You know what?
I have experienced traffic in Philippines.
Oh,
right?
traffic. Oh no.
Yeah,
Sorry for that.
So a 2-hour drive could be a 6-hour drive.
Yeah.
If you get, for actually it could be a 6-hour drive for probably 18 hours a day.
That's true. You can see that again, yeah.
Yeah. So again, it doesn't have to be perfect. If you start from the idea that it has to be perfect, you would never leave home. You would never drive a car because there's chances that you'll be in an accident or be stuck in traffic. The point is that we gradually learn. So again, it's about continuous improvement. It's what I said earlier: make someone curious, help them build confidence, and then you'll be surprised by the results. I said earlier that we have 6 coaches. None of these people came from a Kanban background. The ones who pursued to learn and to become coaches, and they didn't go through, with Eric and I on staff, right? We worked with them. We just had to start somewhere. We had to give them the confidence, and we say, hey, you can come, and observe when I do a workshop or when I coach others. Observe it as many times as you want until you're ready to start to deliver some parts of this training or coaching. And then we also created materials together to say, here is where this comes from, here is where that comes from. And just take it gradually. You're not going to be able, I think some of the question around changing others comes from the idea that we want change right away. It takes years.
Okay.
Lasting change takes time. Now, this is different than responding to an emergency. When you have to respond to an emergency, you go into command and control, you take over, you don't provide options. But those are calamities, responding to an earthquake, responding to a ship that's sinking, right? You don't ask people for continuous improvement. You have to intervene. So again, it's contextual, but most of us do not deal with life and death situations.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Fernando, take us to the Meetup board and
All right.
Unmute and talk. And it's not just me here responding. There are a lot of folks in the audience who actually have a lot of experience. So if you're passionate about something, jump in the way Jeffrey jumped in with his six voices, which I loved. I like that intervention.
So Martin, I think you did some clustering here. Can you walk us through what you saw?
Sure. All right, how do you want me to do this? Do you want me to just kind of point out to certain sections that might be of interest?
What if we just review the classes in general first?
How about this? How about we have someone who hasn't spoke yet? Someone who hasn't spoken wrote a question. Why don't you raise your question? So you have a chance. We want to hear your voice as well.
I like that.
Like that, yeah. Someone who wrote a question, can you bring it up? Can you point us to it so we can talk about it?
Okay, it's Leighton. I'll jump in here. My question was the first one on the top of the slide that we couldn't get anyone to offer an answer to, and it was, what was the first most important advice you can offer somebody new to Kanban that just has a mindset that's stuck on, oh, I've got to get it all done. And what I took away, or part of what I took away from our session today, was to really influence them to realize that the more you have in your active queue, the longer it is going to take for you to get anything done. If you can pare it down and pare it down and pare it down, things get faster. And the goal is to deliver. So if you can stop starting and keep on adding and adding and adding things and just finish the little bit that you've got, then like that actual tangible reality, that tangible experience is what gets people to get their mindsets unstuck. Or that's my thought anyways. And I'm hoping somebody can clarify for me if I'm way off base.
Are you in Canada or where are you based?
Yeah, I'm in Canada.
Where?
Ontario. A city called Kitchener, which is about an hour and a half west of Toronto.
Okay. So I was in Toronto a while ago, I don't know, 7, 8 years. And I was working with an organization and I was meeting with their C-level executives. And I was in a room, and this is a couple of days after I said, before I meet with you, meaning the executives, I would like to understand a little bit of the situation that you have. And for that, what do you use? So I said, yeah, we use Jira. So I like to work with a Jira administrator to do this and that, like take a look at the data. I'd like to do a bit of an assessment and understand your current state, interview a couple of folks. This is before we've done the training and everything else. So I go into this meeting and I start to point out to them something similar to what you have seen in at least 2 of the slides, where I show how many people they have, how many things they have in progress. There were an insane amount of work in progress, some of them 2 to 3 year old. And the really old ones were because the priorities kept changing, which probably is something most of you can relate to. There's always some other priority. And the same people who ask you, who give you a priority in one day, maybe the next day or the next week, they come and give you different priorities and say, I need this right away. But without anybody making the voice of the word visible, making the word visible, right? Showing and say, okay, help me understand. You asked for these things last week. You asked for these things the other week. Now you ask for these other things. But you know, we haven't finished any of the other stuff we started. So that's part of the conversation, right? The other one, the biggest, what I would avoid and I would advise people not to do, don't try to explain to people theoretically. Do not attempt to explain to people theoretically how much more you're going to deliver by having less work in progress. They're going to look at you like you're a lunatic, right? What you have to present is you have to present data. So it's best to conduct an experiment. At least have an understanding of your baseline. At least even if the only thing that you do different starting tomorrow is to say, by the way, I hear you. So someone tomorrow is coming and asking you to start something new. Help them understand all the work you already do for them that you have in progress and all the other work that you stop doing for them because they ask you to do something new. Is this a scenario that happens, Leighton, or anybody else? Is this, do you see this as a pattern?
Oh yeah,
Does it
I've seen that happen for the last 20 years.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter where you are. So that's the first thing we stopped at Adobe. That's where people made a commitment. And actually all these successful consulting stories, you see them all, they start by understanding what happened. And you see those numbers, you see those, whether you see charts or whatever, they go down. And we go from 2,000 things to 400 to 200, and all of a sudden to 24. And it's mind-boggling. But if you don't, you're not a consultant. And also showing my slides is not going to help you a whole lot. So I was in Toronto, that's why I was asking, with this leadership team. And I'm showing them their own data, and I'm pointing out to how much work they have in progress. There was a vice president of marketing who was quite annoyed by what I was presenting, right? So you understand from a marketing perspective, they make promises, right? You probably hear from folks in marketing or in sales who are putting pressure, or even from people in professional services, right? Like, we told the client we're going to do this, we need this from you, engineering, right? So he said, yeah, this is bullshit. He literally said the word bullshit, and he just started to, you know, stand up, like packing his stuff, about to leave the room. So what happened next is we had a workshop. I invited him if he wants to participate, and something I don't usually do, but I said, you know, he was talking to me like I was just trying to sell magic potion, right?
Yeah.
In New York City, which you could buy magic potions on the New York City streets if you want. We have a friend from New York here, right? So I said, look, I'm starting the workshop tomorrow. If you can participate in the Kanban game, it's about 4 hours. And after you play the game, if you still believe what you believe and you do not see my point of view, and if you don't get curious about what we're going to do here, I will write you a check. I will refund you all the money, including travel expenses. I'm going to pay for the plane ticket I took to come here and back. And somehow he responded to that as a challenge, which I knew he would. And he played the game, and at the end of the game, he disappeared. And he came back about half an hour later in the executive room with the executives, and you could tell the man cried. And he said something that I have heard often, which was, I am the reason why this organization can't deliver anything. I'm the one, because the conditions that we had in the Kanban game, I don't know how many of you have played the Kanban game and what version. I have my own version, which again, I have nothing to sell. You can learn this from the Kanban game. There are many different ways of doing this. So the question, anyway, so you can imagine, so yes, all of a sudden this person becomes curious. All of a sudden this person admits that he's been causing a lot of these things. I say, this is not about blame. Are you willing to try something different? So we start to try something different, and their outcomes and everything else improved. So what can you do when you're not a consultant? Because this is really for the scenario of people here who have their own practice, right? Try to get the executives into playing this game. I have had executives play the Kanban game, Fortune 6 on the New York Stock Exchange. Fortune 6 company. They're not the top executive, was not the CEO of the healthcare company I'm talking about, but they were the leadership team of a 12,000 people department. And they've actually came up with similar statements, right? We are the reason why this organization is paralyzed. So we have to figure out a better way of prioritizing work, of understanding our capacity to understand our services, prioritize them, and make sure that we focus our energy on the things that have the highest revenue or they solve the highest level of risk, and right? So again, I think I'm falling back onto the consulting role. But you have to figure out what can you do if you are at a team level or a mid-manager level. And I would say start to collect the data, start to tell the story, at least coach the folks around you that anytime you have more demand, show what is already in progress and say, hey, Bob, you're asking us for these 2 new things. What about the 5 that we already work for you? And these 5, actually 3 of them are on hold because the last 2 that you said are the highest priority. So give a voice to that system, right?
Yep.
Have those conversations, have the number 5 and 6 voices, or make visible what those voices would say, right? Create that empowerment. All right. Yep. Someone else?
Okay, so that question was coming from the starting cluster. Can we take a question from a different cluster so we talk about perhaps a different angle? So who would like to propose a question from a different cluster? We have change, we have CXO, pure Kanban.
So Dragos, I'll jump in if it's okay to go from the change cluster, the first one on the top left there. Like where do we see Kanban going, right?
I had to look again at I was gonna say, are you Romanian? It's funny, I get this, I always there's a Romanian in the room is gonna ask a similar question. I remember 10 years ago this month, and that's when I met Eric in Istanbul at the train, and there was a Romanian there. He works for Google now in Switzerland. We're also still, good friends. He asked the same question during dinner. Where is Kanban going? I have no idea, man. Nobody has any idea. Ask David if you want. But I can tell you that what I'm doing now, I wasn't dreaming about this 3 years ago. Like imagine being in an organization with 40 teams, close to 300 people, seeing revenue going up and up and up from 100 million to 400 million, and we aim for $1 billion. How we got, oops. Am I still my?
We can hear you, Dragos. So Dragos, first of all, I'm not going to be ashamed of that Romanian. Absolutely.
Yes. Yes.
I might start a Romanian club about defining the future of Kanban. I'm not sure how that's going to work for us. But, you're kind of answering my question, Dragos, because right, hear me?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
We can hear you. Okay. So Dragos, I was going to continue the question. Maybe there's a good context here. Say, just the fact that you're describing some of the things that are going on, it's a sign of where we're heading, right? I mean, obviously, to your point, we're not sure where we're going to go, but I think we've got some ideas.
So for us, I would say we scaled and we matured. We are along the same lines of what Kanban has been from the beginning. We just have better tools. We have better we have a lot more confidence across all the different areas. At some point there have been maturity models, right? So you build maturity models around the principles or around the practices. Well, I'll tell you that at some point you get really good, but the better you get at anything you do, you start to see new opportunities that you are not aware of. So I think it goes along with that slide about, methods do not necessarily provide you with answers, but they help you ask better questions. You can take it anywhere. You would be surprised where you take Kanban or where Kanban takes you with this thinking and this approach. I wouldn't have thought that I would go back to work for a firm and be there for a long time. I love Adobe. I love what we do. What we do now is completely different than what we were doing 40 years ago. The pandemic changed that. Like nobody does 2-day workshops anymore in person and playing the game, right? But also the organization has matured because most people have had the training 2 or 3 times. So what do you do now that people have the training 2 or 3 times? What are the new challenges? And part of the answer for us to have that structure of portfolio, program, teams. In the beginning, the adoption was not even, right? You get 1 or 2 teams who really want to do it. You may have 4 teams working in a program, they want to do it. Other people, they don't pay attention, they don't care. And then it's important to give people time. I think going back to one of the earlier questions, sometimes instead of trying to change someone, you may have to create a room for them to get stuck or for them to come back and become curious and say, show me more. But in the meantime, you should be creating alternative answers, doing alternative things that people take. So I don't know how else to answer this question other than you will see it, you will know it when you see it. You'll know that's something different and that you have to adapt. I would say that my biggest fear and my biggest advice I have given to some coaches that I observe, they're just trying to sell classes. How do I sell more classes? Oh, that's wrong question you're going after. How can you help more people? What are the problems you're solving, either through training or through a combination of training and coaching? Perhaps focus on helping other people solve problems and see where that takes you.
Thank you, Dragos.
All right. So it's 9:10 on this time, on our time zone. So maybe time to start wrapping things up. So maybe to close, if I can indulge in another few minutes, would there be any other question here on the board that we shouldn't leave without considering? What would be the one question that we need to talk about before leaving?
All right, I'll dive in.
New York.
What's that?
Go ahead.
York.
Of course, you got to represent, right?
Yeah.
So, so the question I have is under the CXO, and that would be how you would facilitate the CXO conversation for agility using Kanban. So let's say you're engaging with executive leadership. I'm curious, you, Dragos, and/or anybody who'd like to jump in, how you would facilitate that conversation at the executive level, and facilitating it with using Kanban for agility.
So I will give a quick answer and step aside and let other people talk, because for me it's been easy because of my name and the popularity. But I would say that wouldn't have gone very far. I only showed you a couple of case studies. So I have similar results with government or different industries. So when I go, I always listen. I say, tell me more about this. Tell me more about what problem are you trying to solve, right? So you try to prompt the CXO, to open up the conversation, and then you start to give them examples. If you don't have examples, feel free to borrow and use case studies from Kanban University or from the people, in this room who have done something. When you build a business on your own, I would say if you start by becoming a trainer and a coach, but you've never worked with a client, that's the most difficult spot to be in, even if you get lucky to be in front of a CXO, because he's going to say, well, I hear you, but why should I be listening to you, right? So that's where you need to have some case studies. Build them or use case studies that exist. Join. If you have a pipeline of CXOs, get help, perhaps partner with someone that has some good examples, right? Something they've done hands-on. That's the biggest. A lot of people, imagine, and I've been in leadership roles, I've been in a CIO role. Everybody's trying to sell you everything. And depending on what part of the world you are, they even try to bribe you to buy their services. So I'm not saying don't go around bribing CXOs. That's not what I suggest. You're so New York, I don't know, but try to be funny. Partner with someone if you don't have experience to build at least one or two solid business cases that you can make your point. Who else wants to answer John's question?
Anyone else?
Don't everybody
Fernanda,
jump at once.
Sergey? Yeah.
I'm also, I'm interested in, opposing or alternative views as well. It may not necessarily be bring Kanban to the conversation, but just contextually asking if this is a reference or a context that anybody brings in their leadership conversations.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in here. I mean, I personally think trying to bring agility or Kanban is maybe dangerous to some degree, and maybe smacks of a little bit of hubris from my perspective. So, because I don't know if agility or Kanban is in fact a good fit for the problem a CXO might have. So I would want to discover what that problem is, right? So I try to kind of think of it as, at least in my practice and the practice with my business partners, being in the fitness game more than in the agile or Kanban game. So what is it that makes them unfit? Can we discover that? That's the connection we need to make. And if Kanban is a good fit for that, or aspects of Kanban or other things, I think that's the avenue to that conversation. But I don't want to know, I don't feel like it's right to know that there is a Kanban or agility agenda going into any kind of conversation. We'll have to discover that first.
Yeah, I think I would reiterate that is I'm generally meeting, so I'm doing this from the inside as opposed to a consultant. But a lot of times it's a case of really the same thing that we would talk about in static, just at their level, which is what's front of mind for you, what are the kind of challenges that you're experiencing, really kind of understanding where they are, and then start to say, well, okay, well, here's some places where we've had success trying X, or here's something that might work in your case. But again, it's contextualizing. It's that whole thing when you're talking to farmers, use farmer words. So you really need to understand their situation, right?
And if I can add to that, I mean, I 100% agree. Anytime that I've engaged with the C-suite, it's specifically, I try to avoid the terms Agile, Scrum, Kanban specifically, because they are sensitive words. And sometimes they've gone through a previous transformation and they've had bad experiences. When I meet with them, I'm always focused on what are their problems, what are the challenges, what are the key challenges they're having with products, with services, with delivery. And then if one of those practices and those methods or techniques or frameworks fits, eventually work them in that way. But I think it's really speaking their language and finding out what are their problems and what are they trying to solve.
Excellent. That I completely relate to that. If you know, like even at in our organization, I rarely use methodology words. It's all about the services we offer. Here are the services, but the services we offer are really centered on situations and challenges that people might have. By the way, we have a couple of teams that use Scrum, and we encourage them to use Scrum if it works for them. We don't train Scrum, we don't do Scrum Master or anything like that. But the teams are doing fairly well. Their Scrum practice, they even one of them uses points. Nobody makes fun of them. Nobody laughs at them. It works. They present in their fitness review. Great.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Any last minute request? Last call. All right. In that case, the only thing that is left is to thank Dragos for being here with us tonight, and thank everybody here connecting and participating and providing questions and being part of the conversation. We hope this was useful for everyone. And thank you so much for participating tonight. Thank you, Dragos, for the presentation and for your participation. And we'll see you at the next.
Yeah, and if you have follow-up questions, just collect some follow-up questions, and I'm happy to contribute to an FAQ or
all right,
something. Collect those sets. Those are good questions.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.